the old gatekeeper who denied Traore entry to the building and couldn't believe his eyes when they met again. This place doesn't serve vagrants. It was Monday morning, and the sun in Ouagadougou was gentle. The air was fresh after a night of rain, and the red dust still clung to the streets. The city seemed to have just woken from a dream, with small shops cracking open their doors, students spilling out of alleys, and the government buildings in the center opening their gates to welcome a new workday. On Paul Ouagadougou Street, the district's administrative building number 3 stood tall like an old concrete block. Its paint faded, but still holding its dignified appearance. The locals simply called it the paper building because all civil procedures had to go through there. In front of the gates was a small booth with a sagging corrugated iron roof, an old wooden chair, and an old man sitting behind the desk. His name was Sogo, the longest-serving gatekeeper in this administrative district. Nearly 70 years old, thin with a sun-drenched face, but always with a sharp look in his eyes, as though he feared letting any suspicious person slip by. Sogo had been a border guard. After retiring, he had taken a job as a gatekeeper for the government, not for the money, but because he wanted to be useful for a little longer. But because of this, he had become a very strict man, and sometimes too rigid. Around 8 a.m., as the staff in the building started arriving for work, a man appeared at the gate. He wore gray khaki pants, a faded white shirt, a fabric watch strap, and a worn-out backpack slung over his shoulder. His face was tanned, his shoes were dull, and what caught Sogo's attention most was that the man was walking with no car, no secretary, and no invitation letter in his hand. He slowly approached. "Good morning, sir. I'd like to go inside the building for a moment." Sogo looked him up and down. "What do you want I need to ask about the process for late birth registration for people? There are a few cases in my village. Do you have an invitation? Number name Ibrahim." Sogo scoffed. "Ibrahim who? Do you have an appointment? No. I just want to go in and take a look." Before he could finish his sentence, Sogo suddenly stood up, slamming his hand on the desk. "I'll be blunt. This is not a place anyone can just walk into, especially people like you, dressed like some jobless wanderer asking for documents for your village. Do you know how many frauds come here every week?" The man stood still. He didn't react. He didn't snap back. He simply said softly, "I don't mean to cause trouble, but I really just need to meet someone in charge. Leave." This time, Sogo's voice was sharp, as cold as stone. "I don't care who you are. This is a government building, not a bus stop. Leave now, or I'll call security." The man slowly nodded. He turned and walked away. A young woman, an intern at the building, had just walked by, saw the scene, and stopped. "Sir, that man said he needed to ask about the process for people in his village." Sogo turned and snapped. "You're young. Don't be easily fooled. Anyone can make up a story about helping the people." "Do you think he looks like a government official?" The woman stayed silent. The man had walked far, saying nothing more. Only the early sun still cast its light on his thin shoulders, his shadow stretching long across the ground, just like the silence he carried with him. About 15 minutes later, a convoy appeared from the end of the street. 2 black SUVs, 1 military escort vehicle, and 1 media car. Sogo stood up abruptly. He recognized. This was the interministerial inspection team from the president's office. The building was in a frenzy. Staff rushed out to arrange the lines. Sogo opened the gate, stood rigidly, adjusted his hat, breathing heavily. The car doors opened, and the first person to step out was the same man Sogo had kicked out less than an hour ago. The whole area went silent. The man was no longer walking quietly. His escort team followed him, the officers saluted, and the media turned on their cameras. And at that moment, old Sogo dropped his gatekeeper stick. Traore walked forward. Sogo stood frozen, his face pale, sweat pouring down. Traore looked at him for a long while. He didn't frown. He didn't speak harshly. He simply asked, "This morning, did you say something to me?" Sogo swallowed. He tried to open his mouth. I didn't know. I thought you were..." Traore nodded slightly. Just an ordinary person. He paused, then spoke slowly. And that's true. I came here today, not as the president, but as a person, wanting to ask for a few things for my village. No one dared to breathe loudly. The intern stood behind a column, eyes wide, a hand covering her mouth. A gatekeeper had unintentionally closed the door to the nation's leader, just because of his ordinary appearance. And the leader didn't get angry, didn't scold him. He just looked at him as if looking into a truth that the whole country was struggling with. We have grown used to judging others by the dust on their shoulders. I, too, was once turned away at the gate. In the courtyard of the District 3 administrative building, under the gentle golden sunlight of a Ouagadougou morning, the crowd stood in stunned silence, watching the man in the faded white shirt. President Ibrahim Traoré faced the old gatekeeper who had just kicked him out less than half an hour ago. No one dared to speak. The entire administrative district seemed to freeze. Traoré looked at the old man in front of him, his frail body trembling, his hands gripping the gatekeeper's desk as if it were the only thing left keeping him balanced in a crumbling world. No one expected anything from the leader at this moment except for a reprimand, an order, a lesson to be taught to the old man. But what happened next was nothing like anyone had imagined. "May I ask your name?" Traoré asked. Yes. Sogo? Sogo Ouattara. The old man's stammered eyes cast downward. Traoré didn't smile. He didn't act harshly either. He just spoke softly. "Could you walk with me for a moment?" The old man was confused. "You want to walk with me?" "Yes, I need someone to guide me around here. And I believe you are the right person." And so, to the astonishment of the crowd, the president and the gatekeeper walked together down the administrative hallways as if they were old friends, even though one had just been kicked out and the other had nearly collapsed from shame. Traoré didn't speak for the first few minutes. He let Sogo lead the way. They walked past the procedural offices, the file storage rooms, the citizen service desk, and the administrative rooms. When they reached a quiet corner, Traoré finally asked, "How long have you been a gatekeeper here, 24 years. Before that, well, you know, I was in the border patrol. You served in the western region, right?" "Yes, that's right." Sogo was surprised. He didn't understand how the president knew about that. Traoré looked at him. "How many people have you turned away at the gate like you did with me this morning?" The old man lowered his head. "Many. So many. You know, there were people who pretended to be officials, broke and stole files. One time, a man came in wearing ragged clothes with fake documents. I let him through, and was reprimanded for years." He stopped and tightened his grip. "Since then, I swore I wouldn't let anyone through who didn't meet the requirements. I became used to the suspicious looks, to the heavy responsibility, until I forgot that some people come here just to help." Traoré didn't say anything. He took out a folded piece of paper from his pocket, a printed list of children in a mountainous area who didn't have birth certificates which he had received a week ago. He handed it to Sogo. "I came here to find out why this list has been held for more than 3 months. The people there are illiterate. They asked me for help. They don't know what to wait for, who signs it, or who's blocking it." Sogo took the paper with trembling hands, his vision blurred, because he realized he had turned away someone who wasn't here to ask for anything, but to repay a debt for those who couldn't speak. "I'm sorry," the old man whispered. "You have the right to scold me, fire me, or do whatever you want." Traoré shook his head. "I didn't come here to punish you." He paused, his gaze becoming deep. "Because I too was once turned away at the gate of a building when I was in high school. I was wearing a torn uniform trying to submit an application for a scholarship. The gatekeeper didn't believe I was a student. I had to stand outside in the sun for almost 3 hours. But then I still took the exam and I passed. And I didn't resent that gatekeeper. He looked straight into Sogo's eyes. "Because I know sometimes the people standing at the gate are locked behind an invisible gate that no one opens for them." Sogo stood still, choked up. He hadn't expected the president in front of him, the one he had kicked out just because of his worn-out clothes, would say something that made him feel understood. Not forgiveness, but empathy. That afternoon, in an internal meeting between the president and the leaders of District 3's administrative staff, Ibrahim Traoré made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I propose appointing Sogo Ouattara, the Gatekeeper, as an honorary advisor for the public awareness training program." The entire hall was stunned. Traoré continued, "I'm not choosing him because of his qualifications. I'm choosing him because he knows the meaning of the gate. Not just to protect, but to select, without excluding, to open, without blindness, and because he's ready to learn it again even at the age of 70. That evening, Sogo went home. His small rental room, the weak yellow light flickering. On the table he placed the new card he had received, Honorary Advisor. And beside it was a handwritten note from Ibrahim Traoré. "One day you will teach the young how to guard the gate. But this time, guard it with your heart." The old gatekeeper began to cry, not because of regret, but because for the first time in his life, he felt he had entered a place without gates, a place where no one asks, "Who are you?" but asks, "What have you understood?" The gate without a lock. After the surprising announcement of appointing the old gatekeeper Sogo as an honorary advisor for the public awareness training program, the entire city of Ouagadougou was abuzz with conversation. A man who had once been seen as rigid, unapproachable, and quick to scold people was now teaching hundreds of young officials. On social media, reactions were split. One side was in admiration. This is what leadership looks like, not just judging mistakes, but seeing the desire to right them. President Traoré doesn't just teach power, he's teaching real forgiveness. The other side was skeptical. Someone who once turned away the poor now teaching awareness. Isn't that a contradiction? He should be fired, not promoted, but what no one expected was that Sogo himself thought like the second group. In his humble room, Sogo stared at the honorary advisor card on the table, deep in thought. He had once guarded the gate with disciplined suspicion and a fear of responsibility. Now he was asked to set those aside to impart openness. On the first day he stepped into the classroom, where dozens of young officials, civil servants, and security guards sat. He could barely look anyone in the eye. The youth's gazes were sharp, unforgiving. They had heard stories of how he had turned away the president. They had heard how he shouted at the people, and now they were sitting there to listen to him teach. But then he did something that made the entire class fall silent. No slides, no curriculum. Just one opening sentence: "I once locked the wrong gate. But the most painful thing wasn't who I turned away. It was that I locked my own heart from the inside for 24 years. He paused. His eyes slowly scanned each young face. "I used to think that poor people in simple clothes were frauds. I used to believe that being tough was safe. And I used to think that if I didn't refuse, I would lose my job." He took a deep breath. But I was wrong. No one fired me. It was the fear in my mind that fired the trust of so many people. The class was dead silent. Then a young female student, the one he had scolded for giving food to an elderly woman by the roadside, stood up with tears in her eyes. "Sir, today you're opening a different gate." And all the eyes in the class no longer held suspicion. They turned into respect. The next week he was invited to speak at a small seminar for administrative officials in Kaya. The topic of the discussion: how to guard the gate without locking the heart. He stood at the podium, his hands trembling as he held the microphone. And this time he told the full story of that day. "I once turned away the president at the gate. I, an old man, trembling hands, but still sharp enough to strip someone of their dignity with just 3 words. Some people laughed, thinking he was joking. He shook his head. "No, I'm not joking. I was the one who chased the president away like a beggar. A murmur spread through the room, but he remained calm. And I stand here today not because I was right, but because I was given the chance to be wrong, and then to fix it. In the audience, the one who remained silent the longest was the new gatekeeper at the Kaya building, a 26-year-old man who had recently scolded an elderly woman for not knowing how to stand in line a few days ago. After the talk, the young man ran after Sogo. "Sir, did you ever fear being insulted? Fear of losing your job? If you let someone bad?" And Sogo patted the young man's shoulder. "Yes. I lived most of my life in that fear. But then I realized the only thing that needs to be guarded at the gate is not the person, but the kindness. If someone enters with bad intentions, they will leave on their own. But if someone comes with empty hands, maybe they're carrying hope that we can't see." The young man lowered his head. For the first time, he truly understood something that no notebook could teach. A few days later, a strange man came to the back gate of the training center. His hair was messy, shoes worn out, speaking in a slurred voice, holding a plastic bag. The young guard almost chased him away. But suddenly remembering Sogo's lesson, he decided to let him in and invited him to sit on a bench. A little while later, the man took out a drawing, a blueprint of a simple water filtration system that could recycle rainwater at only 1/10 of the market price. He was an unemployed engineer who had lost his papers and his home in a fire. But his idea was sent to the technical department, and a few weeks later the government approved a trial in 3 provinces. The young guard who had stopped him that day was promoted because he didn't turn away someone who had nothing except for faith. When Sogo heard the news, he just sat quietly, a small smile on his face. Not because of pride, but because he knew every time someone is allowed to stay, he is returning a piece of himself from the past. The gate with no lock. One Sunday afternoon, it began to rain lightly in Ouagadougou. The rain wasn't heavy, just a gentle whisper from the sky, a rain that only made the earth smell fresher, the people quieter, and the memories deeper. In a small hall of the National Administrative Training Institute, a special ceremony was being held. Honoring those who keep gates with kindness, there were no media, no cameras, just a few dozen people, young officials, security guards, and those often forgotten, invited to listen and share. In the front row, Sogo sat quietly. On his shirt was a small badge with the words, "Once wrong," and learned. He no longer worked as a gatekeeper. He no longer taught every day. But for the past year, he had traveled to more than 20 provinces sharing his lesson, not with logic, but with the scar in his heart. As the ceremony was coming to a close, the event coordinator stepped up to the podium. "We have a special guest, someone who once had an unpleasant memory with Mr. Sogo, but today he wants to share something." The room was puzzled. From the back of the hall, a middle-aged man in a gray shirt with a sun-drenched face holding a small box stepped up. Sogo squinted, trying to recognize him. When the man got closer, Sogo was stunned. It was the student from years ago, the one Sogo had turned away at the gate of the technical school for not dressing like a student. The man stood before the hall, speaking slowly. "My name is Amadou Barry. 22 years ago, I came to submit my application for the National Technical School. But when I reached the gate, I was turned away because I wore a faded shirt, worn-out sandals, and had no recommendation letter." He paused for a moment. The man who turned me away was Mr. Sogo. The room murmured softly. Amadou continued. "That day, I sat outside the gate for almost 2 hours. No one believed I was a student. No one asked why I had walked 10 kilometers to submit my application. But I still took the exam and passed." He turned to face Sogo. "Back then, I was angry with you. Very angry. But 10 years later, when I became a security engineering supervisor at a large company, I began to understand some people close the gates not because they are bad, but because they are afraid of being wrong. And that fear is the first gate they need someone to open for them. Sogo stood still. Amadou walked up to him and placed the small box on the table in front of him. Inside the box is an old key. It doesn't open any doors. But I want you to keep it as a symbol of forgiveness. Because today I'm not here to remind you of the past. I'm here to return the greeting I never got to say. He bowed his head. Hello, sir. Thank you for once turning me away. And thank you for learning how to open your heart after everything. Sogo could no longer hold back. He broke down in tears, not out of regret, but because for the first time in his life, he felt his dignity was returned to him through an action that didn't need an apology. He stood up and embraced Amadou. No one clapped. There was only the sound of rain falling outside, quietly, gently, as if the whole sky was washing away what had once kept these two people apart. A few days later, on the last page of a guidebook for public service employees, they printed Sogo's words from his farewell speech as a gatekeeper. You're not the one who decides who gets in and who stays out. But you can be the first to greet or hurt someone. So if you must guard the gate, guard it with trust. Because perhaps the person you are about to turn away today is the one who will teach you the most important lesson of your life. The conclusion. We live in a society full of gates, school gates, government gates, residential gates, and the worst of all, the gate in our hearts. Some people spend their whole lives guarding gates, but they never realize. What needs to be opened the most isn't the door, but the eyes, ears, and heart. Sogo once locked his heart, but when he learned to open it, he didn't just let others in. He also stepped out of his own loneliness.